I'm Alan Greeley, and I love thinking and meditating on Scripture. Another word for it, which we don't use very often, is pondering. When the mother of Jesus heard the shepherds retell the vision of the angels' celebratory singing, the Scripture says Mary treasured up all these things, pondering them in her heart. That alone is my goal with this podcast. I want us to treasure in our hearts what we hear from God and ponder it. It would be an honor to have you listen in and ponder with me. To God be the glory.
You have been so, so good to me.
Ponder with me how much of a blessing it is to speak, to use our words in any way that we want to. I'm going to read Mark 7:31 through 37. It's a narrative about Jesus healing a deaf and a mute man, beginning in verse 31. Then he returned from the region of Tyre, and he went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis. And they brought to him a man who was deaf and had a speech impediment, and they begged him to lay his hand on him. Taking him aside from the crowd privately, he put his fingers into his ears, and after spitting, touched his tongue. Looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. And his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. And Jesus charged them to tell no one, but the more he charged them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. And they were all astonished beyond measure, saying, He has done all things well. He makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. Like most of us, I've been speaking since I was a baby. I've never had a problem learning to speak. Some people probably wish I had. I'm not the most eloquent. My vocabulary is probably very average at best. But the gift of talking, the gift of speaking at all has come rather natural to me. When I think about all the jobs that I've had since I was 16 years old, nearly every single one involved me talking. I was 17 years old when I was first hired by Discover Card, and it was to make phone calls and help people through debt issues. And since then, I can't think of a job that would have been possible without the ability of communication through speech specifically. And because I've never had a problem with it and even depended on it to make a living, I take it for granted. I'm trying to change that. In the account we read at the beginning, Jesus heals a deaf and a mute man. The text says he had a speech impediment. That's the way the ESV describes it in verse 32, as a speech impediment. But this isn't a lisp or a stuttering impediment. This impediment was much closer to muteness, because when Jesus releases his speech, the last line of the narrative says the people said this: He makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. Obviously, no doubt, they are referring to the man he just healed. My point is, his speech impediment is described as muteness by the people. This is someone who could not communicate to others. And the joy that healing must have brought that man is hard to put into words, no pun intended. But I think to a small extent, I can appreciate the joy it must have brought him, along with his family and his friends, because I have a nephew that is mute. His name is Jack Metzler. He is the son of my sister, Amber, and my brother-in-law and good buddy, Josh Metzler. My nephew has Phelan-McDermott syndrome. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's a genetic disorder involving chromosome 22. The syndrome acts very similar to autism, but as far as I'm aware, it always shows up in their speech. He cannot speak and is not able to control his body like he would like to. However, he is incredibly intelligent. Unfortunately, with a lot of non-speakers and people that can't control their body as well as they would like, society has believed they were not intelligent for a long time. Society just doesn't know what it doesn't know. And so for years and decades and centuries, people who couldn't speak and couldn't control their bodies were thought to be brain dead. But over the past several decades, especially with the development of technology and speaking devices and the development of spelling to communicate methods, there's one called the rapid prompting method, RPM, where they spell on a letterboard they carry around. Through the technology and the different communication methods the non-speakers are being taught, people are starting to realize just how intelligent these non-speakers are. When I say Jack is intelligent, I know some of you probably think I'm just being nice, but I have seen it with my own eyes. Things that he has spelled out. He is poetic. He almost speaks in song lyrics. It's that poetic, and it makes sense. You know, he absolutely loves music. And his memory is close to photographic, if it's not that. He soaks up knowledge like a sponge. I know Jack listens to the podcast, so I just have to squeeze in here. Jack, I am so proud of you, man. I love you so much. Keep up the great work with spelling to communicate, and there are so many people who will learn from you over the years, and I'm already one of them. But as awesome as the technology is, the speaking devices, and as awesome as it is to see a non-speaker learn to communicate through spelling on a letterboard, what many of my family have realized through Jack being able to communicate through spelling is just how deeply he wishes to speak. It's not just true of Jack either, but in watching, documentaries about non-speakers learning to communicate through spelling and technology, all of them express a desire to communicate through speech, like the rest of us. Learning of Jack's intelligence and learning of non-speakers' intelligence is the first step. Once you realize the child is in there, they're listening, they're learning, they're digesting things, it is so eye-opening, it's so exciting. And then watching them grow into being able to communicate through technology and spelling, that is eye-opening too, just as exciting. They can express themselves. They thought they were trapped. The families thought they were trapped. And so I can only describe seeing it as freedom. It's very freeing. But it's still not what communication looks and feels like in its fullest way. The people around non-speakers might be able to understand that they are fully in their right minds, they're fully able to comprehend, they are intelligent. And as much as people can appreciate seeing them spell things to communicate, let's be honest, there's still a barrier. It's not what communication should look and feel like, and no one knows that better than Jack, than non-speakers. They still know that any limited communication, while they appreciate it, and certainly the families appreciate it, it's exactly that, limited. And because it's limited, their communication will always be marginalized in our society to some extent. That's our fault, not theirs. So I've seen Jack express a desire to speak one day. And perhaps he will, only God knows. My point is, with this journey that our family has all witnessed, with realizing Jack's intelligence and seeing Jack spell messages out, I realize how deep the desire is to be able to talk. And no doubt the desire was as deep in this man from Mark 7. The joy must have just been absolutely overwhelming. But my real point of this episode is this. The more I learn about my nephew Jack and non-speakers, I am touched. Legitimately, I am touched. I am touched by the fact that I have the ability to speak at all. And I want you to be touched too. We can speak up and be heard. We can speak up and be heard. What an amazing thing. And we've got something to talk about on top of that. We have such a gift in the gospel of Christ. To not speak up about something so amazing as Jesus, the Son of God, who has died for us, when so many others want to speak up like we have the ability to do, wouldn't that just be a tragedy? To have something so worth talking about, to have the ability to talk about it, and then to say nothing? It would be so tragic. My goal for this episode is to just get us to speak up. Use the gift of your voice more. I realize this podcast might only stick with you for a day, a week, a month. Maybe something about this episode sticks with you and you call it to mind randomly for whatever reason in the future. But even if it just sticks with you for a day, a week, a month, a short time, in that short time, I hope that you thank God literally for your voice and you show him your thankfulness. I show him my thankfulness by using it to talk about the gospel. John the Baptizer's dad was made a mute for a time because he didn't believe the angel's message that he and Elizabeth, his wife, would have a child. But when Zechariah's mouth was opened, the scripture gives us these words. And immediately his mouth was open, his tongue loosed, and he spoke, blessing God. The moment Zechariah got his speech, he didn't wait 2 seconds to put his speech to good work. And that's what I'm saying. Let's use it for good. Do we need what Zechariah got? Do we need to be made mute to realize the amazing blessing that we have? I'll leave you with a phrase from a psalm. Paul quotes this psalm in 2 Corinthians 4, verse 13. And because of you, Jack, my nephew, I'll never read these words again the same. I believe, and so I spoke. I'll stop talking, for now at least.
There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found something to treasure in your hearts and ponder. The song you've heard is Reckless Love, sung by Praise and Harmony on their album, Resurrecting God. May God's face shine on you always.